Good morning. Today, I wanted to talk about failure and how I see a lot of Christians, especially Christian men, who define failure and are harder on themselves and are bearing weights on their shoulders that aren't their weights to bear. And so I wanted to start out today. How does the world define failure and success? Before you ever knew who Christ was, how did you look at people's lives and decide whether or not they were successful? And I think we all know people look at it based on the results of their efforts. Like, are they well off? Do they have a good job, which usually means is it a high paying job, one that's respected in the community? And I want to challenge that today. How does God define success? And it's so different than how the world defines success, and it's outside of circumstances. And it really is just, it boils down to us as Christians deciding to trust and obey God. And one story I want to focus on here is the story of Joseph in Genesis. If you'll remember, just a quick synopsis of the story. He was thrown in a well by his brothers. They became jealous of what he was saying that he was going to do. He gets sold off into slavery. He gets time and time again built up just to get thrown back into prison. And so, he gets built up by God in this vision. He gets thrown in the well. He gets sold into slavery. He works his way up as Potiphar's right-hand man just for his wife to make these sexual accusations, and he gets thrown into prison. He gets right back thrown in the bottom. And over the span of 12 years from the time he was sold into slavery, he eventually becomes Pharaoh's right-hand man over all of Egypt. And if you took Joseph's story out of context and you took, it's chapters, I think it's chapters Genesis 37 through 45. If you took just sections of one chapter here, one chapter there, it would look like Joseph is failing. But look what happens when Joseph's family, after that 12-year period, comes to the land of Egypt because there's a great famine that has struck the promised land. And see what Joseph says. Then Joseph said to his brothers, this is Genesis 45, starting in verse 4. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come near me." And they came near. "I am Joseph, your brother," he said, "the one you sold into Egypt. And now don't be grieved or angry with yourselves for selling me here, because God sent me ahead of you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there will be 5 more years without plowing or harvesting. God sent me ahead of you to establish you as a remnant with the land and to keep you alive by great deliverance. Therefore," listen to this here, "it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler over all the land of Egypt." So what a great reminder here that, and that's wisdom. It's the ability to see past the circumstances of each moment and say, "Oh, I failed here, I succeeded here," and being able to take a step back. As Scripture says, we no longer view people from a human and circumstances from a human point of view, but we look at them from a heavenly perspective. What is God doing? What does God call us to do? If you want to know something, God doesn't call us to be successful in our own eyes. He calls us just to be obedient and faithful in spite of tough circumstances that are going on in our life. I mean, even if you take what happened on the cross, if you take the Passion Week, if you stop shy on Friday when Jesus was beaten, stripped, bruised, and killed for our trespasses, and you stopped there, it would look like Jesus failed. But Sunday was coming, and on Sunday, when Jesus was resurrected, heaven won. The battle has already been won. And when you believe and trust on Him, the victory is already ours. No matter what is going on in your life right now, whether it's, hardships in communication in your relationships, hard places in our workplaces, no matter what hardship is happening in your life right now, you can take the light of God into those circumstances. And whether or not from our eyes it appears to be good or bad, God is always going to be using it for good. And sometimes we get abundant blessing that God even shows us some of the fruits of our obedience in this life. But there are some that we're not going to be able to see until the time we die. And I think that on Judgment Day, if we even care at that point, because we're going to be with God, He's going to show us all the fruits of what was going on. And then we just get to be at peace with God forever. One other thing that I want to even take, this isn't just one story, one event that happened in the past, and then that's it. It's repeated over and over again in Scripture, in which people, it looks like they're failing, but God is using it for good. Even in Philemon, and this is Philemon 1:15 through 16, um, the slave of Philemon ran away, and I think he was probably a good slave master, and yet still the slave ran away, and Paul was sending Onesimus back to Philemon. And Paul reminds him, perhaps for this reason is why your slave Onesimus was separated from you, so that he who went out as a slave could return to you as a brother in the faith. Always having that heavenly perspective on our circumstances. Philemon could have looked at the individual like, I've lost labor. My slave left me, and I've lost income. I've lost labor. He left me when we were good to him. I treated him as a good slave master. But instead, Paul is reminding him, maybe this is what it took in order for him to truly come back to you. Even think of the prodigal son. Whenever the prodigal son goes out into his sin, into the world, he eventually comes back, and the father runs to him, a sign of great humility. Back then, if you were a master of estate, you didn't run to anything. You had your pride to think about. I mean, you were a big shot, and yet he picks up his robe to run, showing that he didn't care about his status. He was just so happy that his son was returning to him, and that he could accept him again as a son who had returned to him, not remembering and holding against what he did during that time, but instead using it where he was. And that's another great thing to remember. God remembers us, all of our baggage that he called us to. He didn't call us because we were powerful in our own right. God has all of the strength that he could ever need. He calls us in spite of our baggage, in spite of us. And he remembers all of our baggage, and he's going to use it when we come to the cross and we lay that all down. He's going to use that in our story. So just remember today, our stories are still being written. As long as we're alive, he's going to use us. Thank you all. Hope you have a great day.